Russian troops are said to have occupied the site of Europe's biggest nuclear power station after fierce fighting around the facility overnight, which drew outrage and condemnation from around the world. President Zelensky accused Russia of unprecedented terror, while NATO's chief warned that the suffering of the Ukrainian people was only likely to get worse, with towns and cities under siege and civilian deaths mounting. Fears of a potential nuclear disaster at the Zaporizhzhia plant spread alarm across world capitals today. Officials said that the fire in a training center was put out, and the nuclear watchdog confirmed that no radioactive material had been released. It is one of 4 active plants in Ukraine, providing more than a fifth of the country's total electricity generation. And we should warn you, there are some graphic images of this conflict in my piece.
Ruski Mir.
Ruski Mir, the Russian world, the breathless voice scoffs. You hear that phrase all the time. But on the road to Nehoda, it was more underworld than world. A monster barricade, courtesy of the local defense force and the employees of the nuclear power plant. A barricade that was eventually breached. This is what they were protecting, the biggest nuclear power station in Europe. The silent security footage doesn't do the drama justice. A firefight around a nuclear reactor, the very definition of lunacy. A training facility was hit and the 4 reactors themselves remained unscathed. No excess radiation was detected. And yet this is only a few hundred miles from Chernobyl. The Russians are now in control here. And that means they also control 1/4 of all the electricity in Ukraine. Just down the road, the city of Melitopol had already fallen to the Russians a few days ago. But that didn't prevent the Ukrainians here from protesting in the main square. Shame, they shout. Even if they lose this war, one cannot imagine them becoming the willing subjects of Moscow. So much for the gratefully liberated of Russian propaganda. Heading north on the road west of Kyiv, there's the otherwise unremarkable village of Motyzhin. What, one wonders, did the Russian troops have against this place? Why did she have to die? And why him? The senseless carnage of a war waged on lies. No wonder they all want to leave. The future has lost its promise. From space, it all looks so peaceful. The long lines of tanks crisscrossing the landscape, but rearranging everything in their path. In newly occupied Kherson, the Russians were trying to hand out food aid today in front of one of their own cameras. But the camera phone held by a local Ukrainian told a different story. Would you like food from the occupier, the man asks. No way, comes the chorus. Or words to that effect. Back here in Lviv, the Ukrainian government was keen to keep us up to speed with the so-called ceasefire talks, held intermittently with the Russians, possibly paving the way for humanitarian corridors out of besieged cities like Kyiv. The journalists, global and local, hungry for any information.
But do you think that they're negotiating in good faith? And what is the point of these talks when there clearly is no ceasefire and the fighting continues?
No, yesterday we actually agreed for the very important point for the process and the protocols, how to do the humanitarian corridors and how to evacuate people who want to go away. Especially also like it's including the foreign students. We have about 5,000 Indian and Chinese students in Kharkiv and Sumy and other places.
But here, no one is giving peace a chance. Not yet, anyway. We came across this throng of eager men, young and old, doing the paperwork of war, signing up to get their guns before heading to the front. For them, this fight is personal.
Placed my family in a more safe place.
But you will stay here to defend Lviv? Or other places?
Just now, yes, here, and I don't know what will be tomorrow.
But this is today's collection of grim postcards from the abyss. Here, 7 civilians killed in one strike this afternoon, including 2 children. Unimaginable a week ago, now unforgettable.
Now, about 500 miles to the south from where I am, people in the city of Odessa are anticipating an imminent attack. The strategically vital port on the Black Sea coast will now be a target for Russian forces. They control the area near the city on the west side of the Dnieper River. With Kherson and Mariupol occupied, Russia has almost all the southern and eastern borders of Ukraine encircled. Ground-based Russian units are now likely to attempt to reach Odessa. And with the Russian Black Sea Fleet positioned off the coast, there's also fear of an amphibious landing. This would mean that Russia controls all of Ukraine's main points of access to the sea. Well, our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, and her team reached the city this afternoon. Lindsay.
Matt, we spent about 8 hours on the road today coming from the Moldovan border. To begin with, we were passing great long queues of traffic. Cars coming from Kharkiv, which is still being shelled, and Zaporizhia. That's the place where that nuclear power plant is that you've just been reporting on. Then finally we made it into Odessa, and of course there were cars going in the opposite direction from us. Now, it's pretty deathly quiet here. One of the most extraordinary things in Odessa was just seeing signs, you know, with sandbags and signs saying mines and great rocks on the road trying to block any kind of amphibious landing. And that's because lurking just over the horizon are a flotilla of Russian warships. Now, these warships have on them tanks, attack helicopters and Marines. I understand that there'll be about 1,500 to 2,000 Marines, but that isn't enough to take a city of 1 million people, which is why we're expecting them to come in on land as well. And the Ukrainians do plan to defend this. They have their artillery and they are in place. But this is a desperately important strategic place for both the Ukrainians and the Russians.
Not just strategically important, Lindsay, but also culturally highly significant, isn't it?
Oh, very much so. I mean, this is a beautiful city full of 19th century architecture. There's a wonderful ornate opera house. It has a long Jewish tradition. It was a free port, an entrepot in the 19th century. People come here. It's a tourist spot. It's got a big artists' colony here. But, you know, it has a great Russian history, and I think this is tremendously important. Most people here speak Russian, and the last time I was here in 2014, that was when the Russians were annexing Crimea and separating off the Donbass from the rest of Ukraine. Quite a few people I met here did support the Russians. They said, yeah, well, you know, they were feeling a bit Russian as well as Ukrainian. It's very different now. I was talking to a woman this afternoon she was a Russian speaker, and she said, they say they're coming here to protect us. Protect us from what? We're just fine. And that, of course, is the mood that we found all over Ukraine. But the fear is that there will be a battle here in Odessa.
Lindsay and your team, look after yourselves. Thanks very much indeed. Well, yesterday we showed you that very moving footage of the Ukrainian parliament singing the national anthem as they gathered in person to work in defiance of the invasion. Well, earlier I spoke to one of the MPs who was there yesterday, Lesia Vasilenko, and I started by asking her whether she and her colleagues felt in danger.
Well, we all knew what we were doing. It is long known that the building of the Parliament of Ukraine and of the whole governmental quarter is the #1 target of the Russian aviation and the Russian army. But nevertheless, it was important for us to turn up to work yesterday and to vote on all of the laws that are necessary for our military to be doing a much better job at protecting Ukrainians and Ukraine. And we did just that. our duty and our responsibility to the people of Ukraine. And if you ask me about emotions, they were running high yesterday. The singing of the national anthem was the most powerful moment in, I think, the whole history of the Parliament of Ukraine.
When you look at the level of destruction, courtesy of the Russian army every day, when you look at the fact that there are towns increasingly now under Russian occupation, this is going to be a marathon, isn't it? It's going to be a very, very long haul that could end in defeat.
I don't accept that line of thinking, and no Ukrainian accepts that line of thinking. We only allow positive thoughts of victory and the fact that Ukraine will prevail. And we would like to trust the fact that our partners, our allies in the international community will stand with us, not just on hashtags on Twitter and other social media, but will actually stand with us and stand up to the biggest authoritarian power in the world.
So how disappointed were you today by NATO's decision to rule out enforcing a no-fly zone?
With that decision, NATO just signed the death sentence to the very concept of sovereign states and of independent states in the world, because to just blatantly write Ukraine off as, we cannot introduce a no-fly zone because that would mean war with Russia. I'm sorry, that's not an excuse. Russia is already at war with the world. Russia has breached every rule in the international law book. The sanctions which have been applied, okay, they are big, they will have consequences in the long term, but they are not nearly enough to stop them moving into Ukraine and invading Ukraine, infesting Ukraine like vermin, which is what they are doing literally right now, because they have one goal and one goal only, and their goal is to eradicate Ukraine from the face of the earth, to erase Ukrainians from the history of the earth. That is called genocide, if I'm not mistaken, under international law.
So the British government is one of many governments in the West that prides itself now on doing a lot, on sanctions, sending weapons to Ukraine. What do you say directly to our Prime Minister Boris Johnson?
He's doing a lot. And we are grateful for the weapons we are getting and the sanctions that Russia is getting, but that is not nearly enough. When you know that Vladimir Putin, a power-crazed leader, has said that Ukraine has no right to exist, then you know that no peace talks with him are possible. So we call now on the UK to provide that backup. And if that doesn't happen, my belief is that the Prime Minister of the UK and all of the government of the UK are going to fail not Ukraine and not the 44 million Ukrainians, half of them being women and children, but they are going to fail the British people. Why? Because Russia today is posing a threat to humanity as a whole, because they are targeting not just hospitals and schools and kindergartens. They are targeting nuclear power stations across Ukraine, and we have 5 of those.
Although they're not saying this publicly, the calculation is that if they get more involved, if NATO soldiers, including British ones, get involved against Russian soldiers, that would be risking World War III, and they don't want to risk that.
They are already in World War III. The world is already in World War III. It is time to put away the rose-colored glasses and to just admit to it. And it would be better to do it earlier rather than later, when the civilian casualties run by the thousands, not by the millions, and when the refugees run by 1 million, not by tens of millions.
Lesia Vasilenko speaking to me earlier. And later we'll be talking to a nuclear security expert at Harvard about the attack on that plant. Jackie.
Thanks very much. Now, more than 500 international students in Ukraine have found themselves trapped inside a war zone in the country's northeast, more than 500 miles from the only real way out over the western border with Poland or Slovakia. Many say they were advised to stay in the city of Sumy for their own safety, but then heavy shelling began. Jane Deeth reports.
The sound of Sumy. An explosion in the distance as Russia's war with Ukraine closes in on the city. This town, not far away, came under attack on Monday. The mayor said Russian shelling killed 6 people. Meanwhile, in Sumy itself, international students advised by the university to stay put, cram into bunkers when the sirens go off. In the northeast of Ukraine, Sumy is a city with few routes out. East, just over an hour's drive, is Russia, and areas on the Ukraine side of the border are now under Russian control. The British Embassy has told students to try to make it to Ukraine's western borders, but the safety of Poland or Slovakia is more than 500 miles away, a 12-hour drive. A frightening and difficult journey. These pictures were filmed a few days ago by a resident fleeing by car, but few of the students have cars, and buses and trains out of Sumy are suspended. The students are trapped and conditions are grim.
The water in the pipe is really dirty and we are supposed to drink this water because we don't have any water supply.
They've been resorting to collecting snow, which they boil to make drinks and prepare meals. They're frightened and they've got no idea how to escape the dangerous trap they're in.
Well, earlier I spoke to a British medical student who's trapped in Sumy, and I began by asking him to describe his current situation.
We were just in the bunkers in the morning and we just came back to our room. We were just told for like a few hours you can come back and have something to eat or just chill out for a while, try to get some rest. But we are not able to because there is no water and electricity has been off. We are just like struggling to try to get to toilets or try to cook something. There is literally no water to drink, nor washing room or restroom, any sort. And I'm not sure what's going to happen to us at all.
How did you end up trapped? Because many people obviously have tried to flee. Did you and your friends try to leave?
We tried to spoke to some taxi drivers and some bus drivers, but we were just told by them that it's actually impossible because all the roads and the bridges that connects to different cities have been bombarded and destroyed. And we were told to just take a walk, but we are unable because it's snowing right now and it's -4. So we are not even able to make a way at all. We've been contacted with every sort of embassy. We tried to contact with the British Embassy, and British Embassy basically just told us that, I'm sorry, we don't know what to do. They just told us that if you somehow manage to make it to the western borders, let us know or call us. So, and since then, we are just panicking too much.
So an offer of help if you can make it to the border, but no advice or help to get there?
Literally none.
And I just wonder how you're all coping.
We can't eat any sort of meals. If we do, then there's literally no water for restrooms at all. And they're just struggling with the weather. There is no water, no electricity. Like right now, I'm thankful that I had a power bank and I'm able to talk to you because of some charge that I have left on my phone. But there are so many people, they're not even trying or cannot talk to their parents back at home. And that's what really panicking us more, because the parents, they're just crying every time we call, and they're calling us every 20 minutes, you know. And the Wi-Fi is gone, electricity is literally everything is gone.
Have you reached out to anyone else for help? I mean, the Ukrainian authorities,
we have.
Many of you are from India originally. Have you tried reaching the Indian authorities? Have they been any more helpful?
We did. We tried to contact the Indian embassy. They've been told that there will be some sort of evacuation measures that are going to be taken. But up until now, there hasn't been anything at all. They've just been collecting our names, a passport, but there's literally been nothing. In the border with Russia, it's 50 kilometers max that Russians can come anytime. But we are being told to travel almost 1,200 kilometers away from Sumy all the way to Romania or the other end of Ukraine. And I'm not sure how we will manage to do that, because there is no trains, there is no buses, there is no sorts of transportation that can help us or take us to different part of Ukraine.
And how many of you are there trapped in that building at the moment?
Actually, there's a different, we don't know exactly, to be honest. There are more than 4 hostels, and there are people, some people are staying in the flats. But up till now, we've been gathered that altogether foreigners are around 1,000 plus. But we don't know who is here and who is not here, because in this building that we are in, we've been told to stay in the basement and not try to go out at all.
And I just wonder how you feel and how the others feel. You're British, you have a British passport. How you feel with the level of support you've been given at the moment?
We don't feel like any sort of help is being told to us or given to us. I just really request that the government or someone just tries to get, at least if you're gonna do some sort of war, do it, but at least just try to get out the people who we just came here to study for medicine. We're just hoping that someday we'll just become some sort of good doctor so that we can help others.
You must be terrified.
At some point, we're just like given up, literally. We don't know what to do. You can see that I'm really hurt. It really gets to people. I'm really struggling. We really all are struggling. So I just really hope, I request to anyone who is out there who can help us, just try to get us out, even little by little. I really pray that some sort of help is coming on the way. I really do.
So your message to the British government, please come and help us.
Please, we are trapped. We are literally trapped. We don't know where to go. We don't know what to do.
Abro, we will hope that something good happens in the next couple of days and you can get out. We will keep in touch with you. But for now, thanks very much for talking to us. Well, the Foreign Office said the safety of British nationals was a top priority, with specialist teams on hand in neighbouring countries, adding that from February the 11th, Britons had been advised to leave Ukraine immediately if they judged that it was safe to do so. Now, the Russian parliament has passed a new law imposing a jail term of up to 15 years for spreading what they described as intentionally fake news about the military, which could discredit the armed forces. There are also fines for anyone publicly calling for sanctions against Moscow. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, is in Moscow, where he also has to operate under those new measures. Alex.
Yes, well, to win a war, I guess you have to sell a war and sell the message. And today, very much a day in which here in Russia, in Moscow and beyond, the propaganda strategy is really interwoven, I suppose, with things happening on the battlefield itself. One important message to tell you first off. In the last couple of hours, Facebook has been completely shut down here in Russia. Two important messages from the Russian government, from the Kremlin, and indeed from their military today. A Russian diplomat has said this afternoon categorical denials that Russia has used any kind of munitions at all with regard to firing on any nuclear power stations in Ukraine. Moreover, an interesting message from the spokesman of the Defence Ministry this afternoon. He again brought the media and the propaganda message into what is happening in Ukraine. He said there's a big provocation going on, and it's in Kharkiv, where he accused the Ukrainian forces of planting multiple rocket launch systems in civilian areas. He named names, districts, he named streets. He said the point being they would then fire those systems on Russian forces. The Russians would respond. Video of those munitions going in and being fired in civilian areas would be supplied to Western journalists in Kharkiv and used as evidence, as he put it, to promote the lie that Russia is using such munitions in civilian areas. So goes the propaganda on and around what is happening in Ukraine. Here in Moscow, a slew of global media organisations essentially ceasing to function across this country. Indeed, the BBC has suspended all its journalistic operations here for the time being. The BBC set up shop here in 1963. It's the first time they've decided to do that.
It is the law. Talking about invasion or war in Ukraine is now a criminal offence because it is fake news. We must talk about the special military operation, or face up to 15 years in prison. So the Russian parliament voted today, 401 MPs in favour, none against, none abstaining.
Начиная там от Инстаграма, заканчивая другими, находятся в Соединенных Штатах Америки. Понятно, их используют как оружие. Несут рознь, ложь. Мы должны этому противостоять, защитить вооруженные силы.
The websites of 5 global media organisations like Deutsche Welle and BBC were blocked this morning for hosting, quote, false information about Russian military action in Ukraine. The Moscow office of one of Russia's leading human rights groups, Memorial, raided by police this morning.
То мне угрожали применить силу, если я не пропущу. То есть это уровень законности на сегодняшний день в столице России.
They weren't alone. At least one other human rights organisation had similar visitors. And from the leader today, a mood swing. After days of snarling threats, suddenly he seems to be offering the world conciliation.
Мы всегда об этом говорили. Нет никаких недобрых намерений в отношении наших соседей. И им бы посоветовал тоже не нагнетать ситуацию, не вводить никаких ограничений. Мы все свои обязательства выполняем и будем выполнять дальше.
And then, this afternoon, a dramatic moment in Russia's upper house of parliament. A senator claimed that from a 100-strong unit of conscripted soldiers being withdrawn from Ukraine, only 4 had survived. Of course, the Kremlin would probably classify this claim as fake news.
Из роты в 100 человек живых осталось 4. Я в тот же день, накануне.
In Red Square, the mood is, well, escapist. The last days of the Christmas fair still offering a frosty day out for tourists. Or memories of a special wedding day, perhaps. But day by day, hour by hour, this vast country ever more frozen out from humanity's global economic enterprise by the sanctions.
In the land where there is no war, where there is no invasion, the show must go on. But normality can only run so far across Russia with the economic sanctions, economic warfare now in place on this country.
And out on the streets all the while, the behemoth of state security grinds down on perceived protest and dissent. Overnight, at least 300 more people arrested in more than 20 cities for, as we must say, undermining the special military operation in Ukraine in unofficial and illegal ways. The jailed opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, has called for another protest across Russian cities, scheduled for 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. It will be, of course, more people merely spreading fake news on the special military operation in Ukraine.
Alex Thompson reporting there from Moscow. Well, we've managed to get in touch with someone inside Russia. We're not using their name for their own safety, as she told us that it was not safe to be identified on British television. She began by describing how she was feeling.
I am terrified of what is happening. I feel like at this point we are mostly protesting so just that we can look at ourselves in the mirror, knowing that we, well, at least state our position and don't just sit in silence. There is no dependable data on political views of Russian as a whole. Like, we have no way to understand if most of them actually support Putin or they just say it because they are scared. If they answer something wrong, they will be sent to prison. I'd love to see oligarchs losing their money and their power. But also I feel like what the West is doing right now is pushing Russia into isolation and poverty. And that kind of, I don't know, is in a way counterproductive. If there will be like democratic elections in the nearest future, well, I don't know. I hope for that, but I can really see no way of this happening right now.
Well, there are reports from Russia that people have been packing onto the only open train route from Russia into the Finnish capital, Helsinki. Rail operators say that passenger numbers have soared and all train services are full for the next few days. Some of those leaving worried the border might close, others that the economic situation will become too difficult to stay.
I'm Russian, but I'm 1/4 Ukrainian because my grandfather is Ukrainian, and I really support Ukraine in this situation, and I'm fully 100% on the side of Ukraine, and it's horrible for us. For all Russian people, it's horrible. You know, I've been crying for 3 days because it's my personal tragedy as well.
And we have also spoken to one man who also didn't want to be named, who, along with his family, has now fled Russia. I started by asking where he's managed to get to so far.
Currently, my family and I, we're in Finland. We're in a holiday house we've had bought about 10 to 12 years ago. And we used to go there with our family or friends of family, but now we're staying here and using it as a sort of base of operations, or as you can say, a safe haven.
And when you talk about a safe haven, why do you no longer feel safe in your own country?
We do fear conscription, essentially, which is something that can happen at any time. And because the government, well, they're being quite opaque and not very clandestine with what they're intending to do, and they did start a war.
I mean, there had been this rumour that they had intended to bring in martial law, which may well bring with it conscription. They are denying that. They're saying that that is simply not true.
Yes, but the government also said there would be no invasion, and the government has gone as far as to say that this is not a war, this is in fact a special military operation. That leaves some questions as to whether they are correct and as to whether they're being truthful.
I mean, I just wonder, as a young man, you're 20, how much of a
Yes.
fear was that issue of conscription?
To fight in a war such as this, which is a heinous war, to fight against people I might well know, it's horrible, and we had no say in this, and honestly, it's not something that should have happened. And conscription is known for not being exactly concerned with the lives of its soldiers.
And yet, Vladimir Putin has said this is about bringing together all Russians.
Invading a country and, first of all, blatantly disregarding what the other side says, blatantly disregarding the diplomatic, you can say, side of Ukraine, and continuously claiming that there are no civilian losses, no significant civilian losses, that civilians are not being targeted, that civilian houses are not being targeted, while there are constantly videos of such things happening, of houses being hit with rockets, and claiming all of those videos are somehow faked by the Ukrainian government. I think it's quite a heinous thing to do.
In many ways, you're fortunate, your family is fortunate to have somewhere to go. Do you worry about the people you've left behind, the friends you've left behind?
Actually, my family is worried about everyone involved in the conflict. We're worried about our friends, both in Ukraine, who are facing a war, and they don't know if they'll essentially live to see another day. But we're also very worried about our friends back at home. And I've asked a few of my friends, the friends I've known for years, if they can leave or if they have plans on leaving. And their response is, we don't know how.
Thank you so much for talking to us today. Thank you. So what's the Western military assessment of Russia's strategy and tactics on the ground? Well, with me now is Paul McNamara. Paul.
Well, the view of Western officials I've been hearing from today is that the war Russia is fighting is not the war that Russia trained for. In plain speaking, a week in, it's not going to plan. So the plan was a short, sharp, shock invasion of Ukraine and a quick rollover of Ukrainian forces. Well, clearly, that hasn't happened. And look, the best illustration of this is the 40-mile military convoy stuck outside Kyiv. Satellites took these images at the beginning of the week. It's barely moved since then. And people were starting to question, well, is that all part of the Russian plan? The Western view, no, it is not part of the plan. They've had massive logistical problems. The Ukrainians blew up a key bridge. And according to a senior US defense official, that convoy has been attacked a number of times by Ukrainian forces. One other interesting thing, Western officials say that 3 senior Russian commanders have been killed. One of them is this man, Major General Andrei Sukhovyetsky. Look, men this senior are usually nowhere near the front lines, let alone close enough to be shot by an enemy sniper. The Western assessment is that because operations have not been going well, they've had to go further forward, and the quote is, commanders are trying to impose their own personality on the battlefield. Well, evidently that comes with more dangers.
So what are the problems that Russia is facing?
Well, look, there's a few. So the first one is that in the first 24 hours, Russia didn't take out Ukraine's air defences. So Russian planes can be shot out of the sky. Secondly, they've got logistical and equipment problems because Russian military kit hasn't been maintained well enough. That's what the officials say. And the longer that this war continues without any significant changes, the more apparent those failures will be.
So is this good news for Ukraine then?
No, look, so the officials we heard from we're really worried about drawing any conclusions too early. Of more concern, because of all these failures that we've seen a reversion to like an old school Russian military doctrine of bombardment. So we've had more indiscriminate fire, which means more civilian casualties. A high number of those in the last 24 hours. The most worrying, of course, an attack on a nuclear power plant. The Western view of an attack on a nuclear power plant, quote, it's unprecedented and highlights recklessness of Russian forces in Ukraine.
Thanks very much, Paul. Back to Matt.
Thanks, Jackie. Well, we all have to talk about the nuclear stuff more than we ever thought we would. Joining me now for that is from Cambridge, Massachusetts, Mariana Bujan. She's a research associate with the project on managing the atom. There's a title at Harvard University, and this focuses on the future of nuclear weapons, nuclear energy and disarmament. Thank you so much for coming on the program, Mariana. I mean, I thought I'd never be asking this question, but I'll ask it. What is the danger of a major catastrophe when a nuclear reactor is caught up in artillery fire like we saw last night?
Well, to be honest, we really don't know. This is, as has been said just before, this unprecedented. We have not had an attack, a military attack on a nuclear reactor. And just to remind, in 2009, in 2009, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has unanimously adopted a decision that an attack or even a threat of military attack on a civilian nuclear facility constitutes a breach of UN Charter. It constitutes a violation of international law. So that just tells you how far the Russian military, and under the command of its leaders, is prepared to go to breach the rules of engagement in a conflict. One sort of silver lining in this situation is that the security and safety of nuclear power plants have been constantly upgraded, especially following some of the worst accidents on nuclear power plants, such as Chernobyl and such as Fukushima Daiichi 11 years ago. So it's not exactly very easy to cause a major release of radioactive material into the atmosphere, but it's certainly not impossible amid a war.
Right, but they're not built, are they, to withstand an artillery attack? They're built to be secure, but I'm presuming not to withstand someone actually trying to destroy them.
Exactly. There's just so much they can withstand. Each nuclear reactor is covered by this rather robust containment chamber. So it's a reinforced concrete type of structure that is designed to withstand certain impact from the outside and to contain the radioactive release should there be an explosion or some kind of a nuclear malfunction or event inside the reactor. However, none of these structures were designed to withstand sustained artillery fire, missile fire, bombs of various yields. We really, in a war, there could be even inadvertent things, right? The shelling we saw yesterday was very specifically targeted at a nuclear power plant, but there are missiles flying all over the place, and we certainly can have no confidence that these structures could withstand. However, even if a confinement chamber is breached, it does not necessarily mean that there will be a radioactive release. There has to be first a problem with the core, with the reactor core, in order for that to happen.
Just briefly, on nuclear weapons unleashed by Russia, which is something that Vladimir Putin has threatened, what is the command and control structure that he would have to go to in order to press the red button?
So we have to keep in mind that there's two categories of weapons, nuclear weapons, that Russia has at its disposal. One part is the strategic nuclear deterrent forces, the ones that he had put on higher, not exactly on higher level of alert, but higher combat readiness status of sorts. That is not really enormously concerning for Western military observers. It's not a rise in an alert status. Rather, it has been interpreted as a signal, as a communication to the West that do not get involved. We are a nuclear power. So it was the flexing of this nuclear muscle. But Russia also possesses a huge arsenal of non-strategic nuclear weapons. Those are smaller yield, shorter range weapons that are designed for so-called regional deterrence. And the scenarios, if one could think of a scenario for nuclear use, the scenarios for those are if Russia is threatened on its own territory, it looks like the regime might fall. This is the last resort. Okay. Russia might use this to de-escalate a conventional war that it is losing. Okay. However, we really don't know how truthful to their doctrine Russians are prepared to be.
And we don't want to find out. We've got to leave it there. Thank you very much for that rather sobering assessment. Mariara Mujin, thank you very much.